Welcome to The Unsidelined Life, the podcast that challenges and encourages women to stop denying themselves a full life and to step boldly into the opportunities God is preparing for you. Join me for raw insights and engaging conversations to guide your journey of self-discovery and pursue the life that God created for you. Welcome to the Unsidelined Life podcast. This is new for me. This is totally out of obedience to the Lord. That with the things that I had gone through in my life, God was saying, hey, it's time to share your story. It's time to comfort those in affliction like he comforted me. And so, so this is all fresh. This is all new. So have grace. Have grace with me. So what I have been doing, this is before the podcast was even kind of set in motion. The first thing that started was I have a history in being part of the NFL, being a pro athlete wife. There's dynamics to that are very unique, very hard, very just hard to understand unless you're on that inside. And so how this kind of formed, where this kind of went was, I wrote a book, Sideline No More, helping pro athlete wives get off the bench to live out their God-given purpose. As I wrote that, people that weren't a part of that world, the people that knew me, because no one is going to read a book that says helping pro athlete wives, they're going to go, okay, well, that's not me, and they're going to put it down. But the people that knew me wanted to read it. And so people kept saying, Eileen, this is not just for pro athlete wives. And so that led me to writing another book where I thought it was just going to be like different, just a couple of paragraphs to like make it flow. And God had other plans. He had me change out full chapters. He had me add new ones. And this book, a lot of it's the same, but a lot of it is very different. And so the one thing that he really was pushing for was the new title. And I had already had Lady Bellator, lady meaning royalty. She's a princess. She's part of the kingdom of God. And Bellator means warrior in Latin. And so this book evolved into, at the end here, thinking I'm done, and God says change the whole title of the book. So the book, that second book, is called Rise Up Lady Bellator. And I'm saying this as I intro, and these are the first few podcasts. Lady Bellator is who I want to highlight. So I wanted to highlight, going back to the interviews, I wanted to highlight NFL wives. I wanted to start with the ones that I knew, and just kind of getting in this place of, you know what, there's a person behind the wife of. And so these conversations that I started with different women, they've been awesome. They've been on totally different tracks. We're talking some were just girlfriends, and if you're a part of that world, you understand that there's definitely a dynamics. If you're a girlfriend, you're a wife, there's kind of a thing there. I've had the privilege of talking to someone who started out as a player's wife, turned coach's wife, turned GM's wife. And so this one, wealth of wisdom. Anyways, as I was doing that and housing these, interviews, asking them for permission, that one day, who knows, it'll be maybe on a podcast or whatever. It happens sooner than later. So this is where the Unsidelined Life podcast has it's birthed now. And so the one thing that I wanted to do was not only highlight NFL wives, I wanted to highlight normal, everyday women. And it's really this. It's women who love their families, who are devoted to their families, and at some point, in some way, they kind of get lost in that shuffle of life. And so my heart is to push these women back into that space of saying, you know what? I give you permission to stop denying yourself, of living fully in who God created you to be. And so it's not just wife, it's not just mom. She's all those, and she's an impact maker. She's a community person. She knows that she has gifts and callings that go beyond, which make her a better mom, which make her a better wife. And so one of them, who is my dear friend, my first friend moving back to California, is Jules Christine. I will let you, I've been talking enough, so I'll let you take it from here if you don't mind introducing yourself. We just go from there.
Yeah, definitely. Well, first of all, thank you for having me and thank you for doing this out of obedience to the Lord. I know that it is not always easy when He calls you to something that feels very uncomfortable and unknown territory. So thank you. I know it's going to be a blessing for so many women, and I'm excited for you and for all God is doing in your ministry. So thank you. I feel honored to be a part. And yeah, our meeting was truly divine. And so it is awesome just that we're actually living in the same state, but we'll get into that. I'm Jules, and I grew up in California. Grew up in a home that was pretty broken initially. My parents were involved in drugs and alcohol addiction for several years. And through that, God got a hold of their life. And that's how I kind of started to come to the Lord. But now I'll fast forward a little bit. I'm a single mom of 4 kids, and I run a nonprofit yoga and wellness company called Arise. And we'll get into all the vision and more details, but that in a nutshell is me.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay. So one thing that I wanted to like start with, Jules, is how we met. Sorry, I'm looking down at my questions here. We met through a mutual friend. I had a sitter. So I have 8 kids. I had a sitter, I think probably when I just had 4. Her name was Sarah. So she was my sitter in Wisconsin for many years. One of the top, one of the best. A sitter, a good sitter is hard to find.
Yeah.
And she probably is.
Especially for multiple children.
Yes, yes.
Anything for 3, you need someone really special.
Totally. And she's got to have this like right personality, even keel, just takes it all. You don't have to ask her. She knows when to cook. She's cleaning, she's helping out. It's like you could just leave without giving instructions and you can come back and know that things are done. So
Yes.
Sarah, shout out big time to you.
Yes.
So as my babysitter, she ended up leaving me, getting married. Well, she left first and then eventually got married, has five, right? Four.
Yeah.
5 boys of her own up north in California.
Yeah.
So I know this that when I told her that I was moving and I said, hey, I'm moving to Murrieta, the one thing she kept saying is, oh my gosh, you got to meet Jules. You got to meet Jules. So let me hear what she said to you.
Yeah. So, okay. So I'll back up just a little bit. So when she left you, she came to Northern California where I was living at the time, and I had just had my 3rd child. And then I met her she worked with my ex-husband at the school that he was at, and her and I became friends. And then of course she was an angel, and she also babysat for us as well so that we could get out every once in a while she was there. She would always talk about like the impact you've had and what a blessing you were. And then I remember her asking me to pray. I don't know which child you were having, but I remember praying for you and your family specifically all those years ago. Is that crazy? And then when you were moving here, she was like, you have to connect with Eileen, remember? And then she's like telling me, some of the things. She's like, you guys have to connect. Like, I know you're both busy. I know it's crazy. And then when we did, it was like, wow, the Lord.
Yeah, I think we were both like this.
Yes. Yes, jaw dropping, like only God could not only ordain us living in the same state, but literally 10-15 minutes from each other. That's crazy. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And it took a while. It was a couple months.
Yeah.
Probably more than a couple months.
Yeah.
But I totally felt like when I met you, it was so natural. It was so easy.
Yeah.
And it was like, wow, like, God, thank you. Because, when you get, and this is another thing I wanted to touch upon is community. But, when you're so busy with family, you forget. Like for me, I almost felt like I don't need local friends. I have my Zoom, I have my Polo. And then to meet you, it was just like, wow, like no, I do need this. And I mean, you and I, hey, we're gonna go to dinner after this, which we haven't done in a long time. But we know we need connection. We know we need community. We know that God has plans for us, which we'll get into.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I mean, for us to finally meet and to just to see how God ordained all that, like He is so faithful and He's so good. So
Yeah.
yeah, I just wanted to talk about that.
Absolutely. And I even remember like first the initial meeting and then the conversation and then the connection and our story being so similar
Yeah.
in so many ways and like feeling like, oh my gosh, there's somebody who understands
Yes.
what I've gone through on such a deep level. And then, having another friend who's made it to the other side. And not in a way that's like we haven't arrived by any means, but in a way that's just like persistent faithfulness, trusting that
Mhm.
God is going to get us through. And just I remember the conversation. I remember we cried, we
Yes.
laughed, like it was so rich. And I remember walking away thinking like, man, God, you're so good. Like all
Mhm.
those years ago, you connected us in this little tiny way, and then full circle moment, you bring us back to this little restaurant in this little tiny town.
Yes.
I know He's doing big things, so it's amazing. Like
Yeah,
definitely a blessing.
totally. And you almost got me teary. We're not going to go there yet. But
Yeah.
like, no, I think about us and I think about our situations. We're obviously we both I'm remarried, but I was divorced for a good 4 years. And as a Christian woman, and I'd love to have this conversation. Here I have 7 kids at the time. We're in the public eye. We're outspoken Christians. We're helping other couples like get through so that they don't divorce and helping kids. Like we're all about promoting family, and kids are having, or sorry, families were, or couples were having babies. And these are like NFL people who they didn't want to, and so we're like, come
Yeah.
on, like we'd push people to just encourage them, like, hey, be fruitful and multiply. As
Yeah.
we're doing it, they were doing it. And so come to this place of helping others, and then your own world is falling apart. And I know that we had shared that too, because I know that you're big in this community, and with your spouse and things like that. And so it's like it's super humbling, and it's super like, I know, and I want to get your take on this. Like, I felt a lot of shame, and I felt
Yeah.
like I failed, and I felt like, gosh, like who am I now to have any sort of credibility as a woman, as a Christian woman? And so tell me like how that was for you.
Yeah, so I absolutely can speak to the shame. I was living in Texas at the time. And so when I moved back to California, specifically in this area, because my ex and I lived here for so long and we did ministry and we were so involved in the community that coming back here was like, I wanted to like hide. Every
Yes.
time I went out in public, I was like, oh God, please don't let me see anybody I know. And please don't let them ask how we're doing, how's the family, blah, blah, blah. And it was paralyzing in a lot of ways. And definitely, especially coming out of, I touched on the fact that my parents were involved in drugs prior in my young childhood. But then when they came to know the Lord, several years later, they have a full blown ministry of restoration. And so growing up my teens on watching God restore, drug addicts, thugs, gang, all these like, people who have, found themselves in really tough situations. And within that restoration, there were so many marriages restored. And so me, like, in that second half of my life, really being dedicated to the Lord and praying for my spouse and waiting and trusting Him. And then getting to this point where I lost all of it, it was a huge like, God, what did I do wrong? Like
Yeah.
I somehow failed. And then the embarrassment of like being a Christian in the Christian community and then going through a divorce, I felt very ostracized, like,
Mhm.
like, yeah, I did something wrong, or somehow I failed, or I didn't hear God properly in the
Yeah.
beginning. And I remember specifically doing some counseling, and my counselor gave me some really good advice. She said, you know, you are a daughter of the king regardless. You have to make choices moving forward that represent what God is in your life, who God is in your life. And you don't have to hold your head in shame because, you know, ultimately it wasn't my actions that led to where I ended up. Some of them were choices later because of actions, but she gave me these two tools, and she said, and this helped a lot because I felt like when people asked me something, I had to say exactly what happened and give them the spiel because I wanted to be honest.
Right.
But then you end up crying, you end up telling them more than they need to know, you know.
Yes.
And so she gave me these two tools, and I tell women that come into my life this all the time. She said, have a 30-second response, have a 2-minute response, and have a, you know what, that's a longer conversation. I'd love to sit and chat with you, and then you can speak more to it. And my 30-second response would be something like, you know what, we're no longer together, but would love your prayers for my family. And then they would engage me more. I would just have to say, like, this is all about boundaries too, which is something I'm passionate about because of what I went through. But then I would just say, you know what, I'm not really, you know, in the place to share right now, but if I do, I will definitely reach out. And so that gave me freedom, and it kind of like that kind of released a lot of the shame, because the shame part for me was having to say, like, oh, we're divorced, like it didn't work out, like it failed, especially like you just spoke to, being leaders in other marriages, like encouraging other, you know, married couples and also others, younger people as well who are not married. So definitely, but God is so good even in that, right? Like he just he slowly leads us to remove that shame.
Yeah. You know, like there's so many angles and different areas that we can take this to. And I mean, it always takes two to tango in a marriage. We know this.
Absolutely.
But I know for you and I, we wanted our marriages to work, fought till the very end.
Yeah.
And even still, you know, it's just that, having to endure the shame and then getting to that point of, you know, a lot of people, and I know even from my situation, the polygamy aspect was already kind of trying to work its way in, and just the different things. I mean, the one thing that's I would say that's different with you and I is, you know, and to some extent you've had the freedom to stop conversations or put boundaries, and in my situation, it happened to just be all out in the public eye that I couldn't even control. Like, I mean, it was just talked about on YouTube and all these things. And so I had to really work through kind of having a tunnel vision to just focus on my family and things like that. That idea that even though this happened, God still desires to use us. God is still a God of redemption. He's a God of restoration. It may look different than what we thought, but he still uses his daughters. And I know that he's using me, and I have to push through. I don't know about you, but I have to push through that shame still. I mean, there's a point where I remember, and even still, like I'd say, like, God, really? Like, I never thought that my ministry would be to women who are in the process of divorce. I mean, people were telling me,
no,
you know, did you have that? I felt like they wanted me to endorse, like,
yes.
like, she got divorced, I can go get a divorce. And so women would call me, and we had to have these talks, these biblical talks. And there was many times where I'd say, look, I had my own situation and I'm hearing yours. There's no grounds for divorce. And that's a fine line, you know, that's a hard thing to say. And I don't know about you, but for me, I know I had to know clearly that God was saying, it's, you know, go in peace. It's time for, and actually I wasn't the one that filed for divorce, but that feeling of like to go in peace. It's, you know, you're not no longer bound, because I was literally told I was property even after he was married. And so God had to really work that through with me. But and talking to other women, I would have to encourage her, hey, you know what, your husband does love you. He just needs guidance. He needs mentorship. Pray into that. So what you're telling me is not, I cannot endorse that,
Yeah.
So I just felt like they were like kind of looking for that. And thank God in the situations where I was able to speak into those particular ones where divorce wasn't something that they should have done, I've seen them push through and work it out. So those are, that's encouraging, because that's a lot to just go, I don't want people to divorce, that's not, it's not my call, or that's not my whatever.
Yeah.
Billboard sign is, hey, I divorced, go ahead.
Yeah,
So
totally.
I think you were gonna say something about that.
Oh yeah, it's so crazy because I feel exactly the same way. I would have, initially the shock and the betrayal and everything that I went through was so heavy. And although we weren't in a huge public eye, we were a part of a really big Christian community, and we impacted a lot of high schoolers' lives. And within that, there was a lot of just emotion. And one of the things that I remember is I was devastated, I was heartbroken, and of course it like shut down, physically, emotionally, spiritually, just like in a whirlwind. And I know what I'm talking about. And anybody who goes through it, it's like you cannot explain it. It's like my mom used to say, like, I was a shell, but I wasn't fully myself, like I was there, but I wasn't. But she gave this really beautiful imagery to me. She said, it's like you were in a head-on collision and you were in a coma, and your body was there, but you were completely just gone. Yeah. And I'm sharing that to say, initially, the shock was just pure heartbreak. Mm-hmm. And then you come out of that, and because of the way I was raised, and like I said, because I saw restoration, because I love the Lord and I believe his word is true, and I believe in marriage, and I believe in family, and I believe that, God can change and redeem anything. Yeah. Once I came out of that brokenness, which for everyone is different, right? Like for me, it took a long time, and I know my why it took so long. And that is part of one of my passions too, is to share that, marriage and family had become a God in my life, and I didn't even realize it. Like, oh. I was walking with the Lord. I was faithful to be in his word. I loved him like I do now, but I didn't realize that my marriage and family had kind of creeped into the place in my heart where God only should be. And so when it was destroyed, or when it was taken, it was devastating for me, but my anchor was in him. And so that's what kept me from, I questioned, I wrestled, I cried out to God, like, why? I don't understand. This isn't fair. How could it be us? Like, I would have never thought it'd be us. Right. Like, totally. But then I moved into okay, God, how do I forgive? And I'm asking him to restore. I'm asking him for this miracle. And it didn't happen that way for me. And having to surrender that took me 2.5 years until I heard God speak so clearly to me, let go. Because if you don't let go, if you keep holding on and you keep clinging to what is refusing to follow me, you're going to hurt yourself. Wow. And I remember like it was yesterday, that day. And so what I always tell women, and I know exactly because a lot of times people want that quick out, right? Like, it seems easier to divorce and move on. It's not, right? Mm-hmm. The grass is not greener on the other side. It's hard to stay and work through and restore too. But if God does not tell you go, and there's no biblical grounds for divorce, I encourage women, stay, fight for your marriage as long as you can. Pray, fast. If you need a time of separation, counseling, community, all of the things. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So, but then at the end of the day, it's about obedience, right? It's about a surrender heart. And that's what gave me freedom. I remember my dad saying, because I was crying one day, I was like, God, Dad, why? Like, God has changed. I've watched so many hard people come through your ministry, and God just softens them.
Yeah.
And why isn't he changing things for me? And my dad said, this is why a surrendered heart to the Lord is so important, that obedience. We can only control us, each of us. And
Right.
so then my surrender became letting go and being okay with it wasn't going to look like I wanted it to look like.
Yeah.
And that's a hard thing. But it is that like seeking him, like I'm working with an individual, a woman right now, and she's in a really tough spot. But I'm like, do not leave unless you have biblical grounds and the Lord saying, go. Otherwise, bring in all the resources. You know?
Yeah. So good. Totally can relate to that. I felt, my eyes perked up that way. Like, okay, how long was it for me? It was about, I think it was about 2 years also. And, it was a whole lot of, helping the kids navigate through. It was, we're praying, we're believing, we're trusting God. I mean, those private conversations with me were like, Lord, I honestly, there's no emotional connection anymore. I mean, I was hurt, so bad and just kind of like felt, I was in a funk for 2 years, just losing myself. And I remember thinking like, God, I don't even have any emotional longing or connection, but I trust you and you can do anything. You could change my heart. You can change his heart. And yes, it did come down to that place of just being at peace. The one thing, and I'm like that biblical person, because people would say move on. I mean, he was already married. And having to talk to the kids through and navigating through, like, I just remember having this conversation where I did find out he was married. And so going to the kids and saying, guys, I know we're praying for your dad, but he got married. And even still, I thought, Lord, you can do anything, And so with my 12-year-old, I remember him, well, he's 12 now. He was 5. And, he's just kind of thinking, and he goes, well, Mom, if he's married, how is he going to come? How can he come back? And I just remember thinking, I don't know, we just got to keep praying. And I also said, and everybody has free will, that fine line of like believing for someone and having the faith, but really ultimately it was just, we all have choices. And so in that process of him, like, just kind of like wrestling through that, I remember him, just going, well, Mom, so are you going to get a new dad? And, he's 5. And so I knew that he meant a new husband, but from his point of view, he wanted a dad. And so those hard conversations with the kids and wrestling through, and for me, like I said, he was already married and I'm still just trusting, Lord, you can do anything, Lord, you can do anything. And it was 3 different times where he was showing me that scripture where it says, if the non-believer wants to stay in the marriage, you're to stay. But if he wants to go, the one shall be in peace, basically. And I'd heard that many times. But yeah, so there was a point where God just showed me, Eileen, he's renounced Christianity. He is not a believer in Jesus anymore. And it was like, oh my gosh, this is the non-believer. He doesn't want to stay. I can be at peace. And it was, I mean, it took 3 times for him to show me 3 different ways. But using that same scripture, so it was one night, then the next day in the car, next day it's something else. It's like, okay, Lord, you're making it clear. He's funny. He knows how like stubborn or duh. Like
Totally.
But once we were there, it was like, okay, yes, like I'm at peace. And then of course he started stirring my heart for a longing for someone else, and that's a whole other story. But yeah, so I want to ask you in terms of, because again, we're in different situations. I don't have to, and I don't know if this is like too personal because this gets tough. But this is reality. Like I don't have to deal with my ex anymore, and he's not in the kids' lives. Like what's your biggest challenge?
Oof. I think as far as navigating co-parenting,
co-parenting, or we can talk about, because you had mentioned forgiveness. Like,
Yeah.
so you pick one. Because yours is, I would have to say, because you're co-parenting, that's hard. And that's one space that I'm not, thankfully, I don't have to navigate through right now.
Yes. Co-parenting is very hard. Forgiveness, I think, ties into like, it is a one time, but it's a continual as well, right? Because, we get triggered. And so those things come up. And especially for me, I'll speak to the challenge of two things: being a single mom and co-parenting. Being a single mom, the biggest challenges, are just financially with my kids, having to, go from having what I needed to having nothing was and continues to be like the thing I'm constantly putting at the feet of Jesus, because there's this instinct that I have that's like, okay, I'm gonna go, I'm gonna do, I'm gonna da. But then I have these four little souls that need me and that I want to be there and I want to invest and I want to disciple them. And so sometimes not sometimes, you have to constantly make sure that there's this juggling act, and there's sacrifices that have to be made. I remember initially having no support financially, being completely wiped out and away from everything, and standing in the food stamp line, crying with my, he wasn't even 2 at the time, on my right hip, and just saying, God, how did I end up here? And I remember, though, looking around that room and seeing all the women with kids in there. And I said to God, if you help me out of this, I want to help women in my situation. And that was almost 10 years ago. And it's just awesome. I'm kind of jumping ahead, but that is really, really a constant challenge, just because I was a stay-at-home mom and my priority was my husband and my kids, and I loved it. And I loved being every moment. And having to divide myself was really challenging, having to be the sole provider and, the mother discipler, the chef, you see those things that pop up in the web. And, if a stay-at-home mom was paid, she'd be in the, million because of all the things she does. But that created a really unique challenge. And then the other thing was exactly that, like dividing my time. I always, and this is something I have to be intentional about, it's a priority for me, but making sure that I'm there for my kids. And that doesn't just mean like physically, but emotionally, spiritually, like committing to praying for them, committing to watching what they're doing. I mean, it's a full-time stinking job, especially with cell phones and iPads and so that part those two are the most challenging, I think, in the journey of being a single mom. And, there's so many different aspects of that. Forgiveness within that it has had to come continually. And I've only had an insight to how much I've had to continually forgive because I'm in his word, because I'm connected to amazing women like you and other friends who are helping me stay accountable. I'll share just real quickly. One of the things the Lord showed me recently, about a year ago, I was, just struggling financially, and maybe like 2 years ago, struggling financially and wasn't sure what I was going to do. And I was dropping my kids at their dad's house, and I was irritated because I was like, how is it that he gets to move on and not struggle, and here I am with the 4 kids, and it's just me. And, that you start down the rabbit hole of complaints, and you start snowballing. But what the Lord showed me is that was a bit of twofold. It was a bit of discontent and a lack of gratitude for what he has done. And then I stopped and I had to confess that. And I say it falls in forgiveness because it started me on the bitter train toward him. And so then I just had to ask God to take that, to allow me to, and he did. And it took about a week of me faithfully praying for that. And you know what? Then I was back to like continuing to pray for him to come back to the Lord, to, you know, be what the kids need him to be. And it shifted my thinking, and it freed me again,
Yeah.
you know? And so there's those like little steps in the journey that, you know, I did the forgiveness work initially. The first 3 to 5 years, I was in a lot of counseling, and God delivered me from that unforgiveness that I was harboring toward him for the pain and the hurt and all the things. But he also allowed me to forgive myself for the things that I had to own, right? And then now in the journey moving forward, there's been little pockets where I've had to go back to, wow, Lord, okay, I need you to take this and forgive me for letting myself go there and not going back to, and it's a focus thing, right? It's a redirect. It's like you're staring and it's like, nope, like go back, lift up, right? More like,
yes,
look back up. It's this vertical that we need to be focused on. And every time I shift it, like every time he allows, you know, somebody in my life or a sermon or a scripture or something to just shift that focus, it radically changes and it frees my heart. And then I'm able to, you know, get back to what he's called me to do.
yeah, that's so good. See, like it reminds me, so part of when God gave me Lady Bellator, it was rooted from this thing that you're a contending matriarch. You fight for your family, you fight for your marriage, you fight in prayer, and you fight differently, you know, not the world's way. And so I look at forgiveness as you're talking, and like, gosh, forgiveness is a choice. It has nothing to do with emotion. It's a choice, and it's a weapon. And so it is a weapon that works. It's a weapon that is so different than what the world says. The world says, get revenge, you know, fight back, be angry, be bitter, be tough in that way. And like God says, forgive. You know, it doesn't mean that you're subjecting yourself to, you know, the abuse and the different things, but I'm releasing this person from holding me hostage to those things that he or she did. And so you're choosing to forgive, you're setting the tone for your family. You're not allowing the devil to get you to get a foothold on staying a victim. Because I hear you, like, it's hard. I remember, you know, because if forgiveness comes in layers, I remember just recently, I think I might have told you this, but we were at a marriage conference. And so I'm, you know, married to Michael, and we're at this marriage conference, and there was one part where they separated the husbands and the wives. And so they're like, okay, ask Holy Spirit who you need to forgive. And in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, it's probably going to be my dad for something or Michael for something. Because I'm thinking I've completely forgiven my ex. And I can feel Holy Spirit saying, you need to forgive your ex. And I'm like, it was weird. I didn't want to say that. So I'm having to confess to these two women. Okay. I'm like, I'm telling you, there's like no like emotional thing there, but yeah, I'm not, and I felt like I forgave, but God is saying like, forgive him. And so what we had to do from there was say, I forgive you for this. I forgive you for that. And just listening to Holy Spirit. And it was, I forgive you. And I had to go down the line. It wasn't about me initially. It was, I forgive you for not being there for this child. I forgive you for the thing that you said to this one. I forgive you for not being there, you know, for the driving lessons or the sports, you know, like and they want to play football and you could have done, you know, so all those things I had to forgive. I forgive you for the things you said to our daughter. I forgive you to the son you have not even met yet, you know, all that stuff. And so I'm doing it. And then from there, I went from that to saying, I forgive you for putting me in this situation of starting all over and having to do. And it was like, whoa, and all that, because it's like, why am I dealing with that? Or why do I have to do that? I'm here for my marriage, my marriage retreat with my husband. It dawned on me, and I had to apologize to Michael. I was like, oh my gosh, I have put so much of a burden on you to pick up all the things that my ex wasn't and isn't for my kids. And he has to go through he has to go through a lot of healing too. I mean, he's got 7, he's been abused. And so it was just like, oh my gosh, there is layers to this. And so that process helped me uh to not expect so much from Michael, which really put a strain on him,
Yeah.
to really put on him, which was never something that he could, he could heal in my
Yeah.
own kids, he's definitely, he's got his role and things like that, but it's a whole, that's a whole other different dynamics. But yeah,
Yeah.
so
I
forgiveness
love
is
that.
a
That's
challenge.
amazing. Yeah. I'm sorry. What'd you say?
Yeah, no, so forgiveness, it's a challenge, but it's huge. It's a
Yeah.
need,
When you were talking, you said forgiveness is layers, it has layers, and it's so true. And the forgiveness, allowing yourself to choose forgiveness, like you said, brings layers of healing. Layers of forgiveness are opportunities for layers of healing. And
Yeah.
I've seen that to be true in my life, and even like you said with the kids, and I think that's so powerful that they asked you guys to name it, and then to like ask the Lord, okay, what is it that I need to forgive? And then he just lays it out. And that's the thing I think, I would say to women and just people in general, but like when the Lord is there waiting, he's waiting with all the knowledge and all the insight and all the healing and all the discernment that we need. And all we have to do is go and ask. And then he's gonna infuse that, impart that to us, And there's been so many times in this process that, there's different modalities and things that are helpful, and tools that and resources that come alongside with us. But ultimately, it's going to him and his word and hearing from him and allowing his spirit to come. Because in my own flesh, I do not want to forgive. Like
Right.
like,
Right.
I'm like, like, no.
For sure.
But with his spirit, that is what empowers me to let go. And the other thing is, I don't have to go like searching or asking or begging for getting that forgiveness. I don't need them to be involved for me to have forgiveness and freedom.
Yes.
And that's another huge thing for me. I felt like I'm a big communicator. I like to talk with people when there's, issues or whatever, especially in my marriage, and it's like, initially I felt like, oh no, we have to have a conversation about this. I have to go to him. And it was like, no, unless the Lord specifically directed me, like, okay, you need to go to him and ask for forgiveness for this thing, then I did. But most of the time it's about doing the own work between us and the Lord,
Yeah. Yeah. And see, I'm so tempted to get into this other aspect of, so you talked about, and we'll just keep this shorter, but because you had talked about that, the co-parenting aspect of things, having to forgive. And so for me, so my forgiveness comes in, it's like kind of twofold. So I felt that the forgiveness part was easy for me to forgive my ex, to pray for my ex, pray blessings over him, because I didn't have to deal with him anymore. I mean, it's like there's some things, but very few and far between. Of course, as the kids got older, there's a different dynamics I have to pray into. But I find my challenge is like with my new spouse. I'll talk to him about it, but I'm like, I have to forgive you. And so we could be fighting. I have to forgive you, and then I have to go to bed with you at the end of the night. Like that's a challenge when you're not feeling it. The whole feeling part and the choice part. That's where it gets challenging. So yes, there'll be another talk of the remarriage thing, which right now I know that you still desire that. Am I right, or are you content? Like,
yes, I do. It's so funny. I heard you say that the Lord kind of gave you a point that you were kind of open to that again. And I am open to it again. However, I do feel like God has so clearly given me this mission and vision. And so it's a kind of a surrendered thing, to just like his timing in that. But right now I know like I'm called to the Arise ministry, and that is, that and my kids, obviously him first, then my kids, and then the ministry is definitely my focus. But yes, I definitely do long for that or want that eventually. It's just trusting his timing and, especially with, kids involved and all that. So,
Oh, for sure.
yeah, definitely.
Okay, so two things. So that's good. It's good to know, and it was the same for me, that when you go through hard times, that I hear it from you, and I know that that God got me through that. I wasn't bitter toward men. I wasn't anti-men. And I remember there were people, and I'm sure with you, that people wanted to set me up. And I'm like, I don't know. I have no problems with men, but I do not have the time. Like it was just all about the kids and all about doing all the things. For me, it was jump starting the car, mowing the lawn, like plowing the snow. Of course, I had my kids to help, but there was definitely things that to even consider having an emotional relationship with someone, it just was like, no way. What I like to highlight whenever I've been doing these interviews is I like to highlight the fact that God has created a woman to be so much more than she realizes. And so for you, the last thing we had talked about is your segue into feeling into being called into a rise wellness. Is that the name?
Yeah.
Okay. So you yeah, explain what that's about. How did that come, to be? I'd love to hear all that.
So, yeah, I always had a passion for health and fitness ever since I played soccer in college. And in the off season, we were supposed to do something that was going to help us stay fit and healthy. And so I got into group fitness and cycling. And when I was doing it, the instructor said, you should get certified and you should teach. And I was like, what? So that I was like, well, I get paid and it's good money for being a college student, and it's also giving me a workout. So I did. I went and got certified, and that started me into the whole like fitness and wellness, and then it just grew.
Which is another connecting thing with us too. We're like, what? Yeah.
Yes, totally. And so it just grew over time. And then when I had my kids, I was always like, very active before and then after. And I started teaching some group fitness after the fourth baby, just because I wanted to slowly start getting back to, finding myself again, because, like we talked about, sometimes you get lost in just the giving of motherhood and being a wife and that was definitely, me in a lot of ways. And like I said before, I loved it, but I didn't realize that I was made for so much more. I mean, I knew that in my head, but I wasn't living that out. And I think for multiple reasons, time was the biggest one. Like, where do I fit in something else? And so once I went through my divorce and I was, found myself, with 4 young kids at the time. My ex didn't live in the state. And so I was what they had. So I have a teaching degree. I taught in high schools for several years and I loved it. I taught and coached soccer. That was definitely a passion. I love youth and working with youth and mentoring them. But in order to do that, I would have had to sacrifice my own children. Like, they would not have gotten what they needed from me. I wouldn't have been able to pick them up after school. I wouldn't have been able to help with homework or be at their sporting events because I would have been investing in other children. And so when I really sat down, I was like, God, I can't do this. Now, financially, it would have been set. I would have been set, right? I would have been comfortable, stable foundation, good benefits, all the things. But at the end of the day, my number one calling in ministry here on this earth is to be a mom. And right now, because I'm not a wife. So, outside of obviously the Lord. So with that, I decided, okay, I'm going to do something on the side when they're at school. So from the hours they go to school, I will work. And I have to figure out what I can do to do that. And so it was hodgepodge. It was grab whatever comes and praying. And so I was blessed with the opportunity to teach health and PE essentially, and some health classes. And then I was able to start teaching fitness classes. And before I left Texas, right before everything happened, and this instructor that I used to work with at the gym, she invited me to go to a yoga class. Well, I am like the high energy, let's work as hard as we can, sweat as much as we can. Former athlete, like we had 3-a-days in college. Like I want to burn. So when she put me in my first yoga class, I was like, like,
yeah.
I did not like it. I was like, this is so boring. Who wants to do this? And afterwards, she's like, what'd you think? And I said, well, I think you did great, but I don't think it's for me. And she challenged me. She said, you know what, Jules, come twice a week for 3 weeks and see if you feel a difference. And so I did. And it made such a big difference that I was like, okay, well, fast forward when I ended up here in California, and without a job, I decided I wanted to get my certification to teach yoga. But at the time, I had no money and I didn't have extra time. So I applied for a scholarship through this yoga community and I got it. And so that's how I got my first yoga certification. And since then, I've got, several more because I love it so much. But what the Lord showed me through being present on my mat was that the stillness that I was so busy moving through life and doing great things, doing good things, but I was lacking that stillness that, the be still and know that he is God, the stillness that ushers in his presence, the stillness that allows those voices that you've been reading and memorizing to ring in your mind and to anchor into your heart. And one of those verses was in Psalms. It says, God is in the midst of her, she shall not fail. And I remember being on my mat and God bringing that verse to my mind and just weeping. And meeting God in a way that is a worship expression was something so impactful for me. But I couldn't afford any yoga studio in the area. I would literally take the free week and then I would ask for Christmas and for birthdays that, some kind of like gift cards or class passes, because I couldn't afford to spend X amount per month when I had 4 little kids to provide for. So all that to say, once I got certified, I could teach. And then if you teach, most of the time you can take classes. So that's how I was able to do it. And that grew into just realizing the power of combining a worship movement meditation with just this intimate time with the Lord. And because I was in such a broken state when I first came, the Lord just met me in such an amazing, transformative way that I wanted this to be available to all walks of life, to the women I was standing in the food stamp line with. And so that birthed in me this desire to bring a Christian focus to fitness and yoga. And so that's where it started. And then I just started journaling, asking God, like, how does this work? What's the name? I changed the name like 400 times and I will never forget when he gave me the name. But that is essentially how it came to be.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so as we get into we've had conversations before, the controversy of yoga. And we all have our different takes and our different beliefs, but knowing how you love the Lord, knowing what it did for you, and hearing the testimonies that you shared, I don't know if we're going to do it this time or not, but it's like, wow, you said it. Like one, God is so much bigger and he redeems. You talked about redeeming yoga for the Lord.
Yeah.
And you talked about him meeting you where you're at. And so I remember, like you, I love to be active. When I work out, what do? The first thing I do is eliminate the warm up and I eliminate the stretching. I'm older, I should totally do that, but I don't. And so I remember, like trying yoga before, and it was just like, it wasn't my thing. And I went to, here I'm local, we talked, and I was like, yeah, I'm gonna go. And I went and you weren't there. It was Gina who taught it. And I remember being there and she was talking about the kingdom of God. And she was just, throughout the whole thing, it was my body needing that stretching, my body needing that relieving of stress, my ears and my heart and my mind were focused on the Lord, praying the whole time. and praising him and hearing God's word, I never felt so like, "Oh, I needed this." Like it felt so good. And
Yeah.
it's hard for me to, I could never do it on my own.
Yeah.
It's just something that like when I go, the last time that you and I saw each other was at our church at our church retreat. And I just remember thinking like, Lord, like as I'm stretching, as I'm doing these, like, Lord, I'm praising you right now. Like it is so hard for me to discipline myself to just be you and I focused. And he's blessing me as I'm, sitting there and just worshiping him. But so yeah, I love that. And I've seen what God has done through you. He's obviously blessing you. He's obviously blessing women. Like you had talked about, yeah, how it's like a nonprofit, right? So
Yeah.
can you explain that part of it?
Yeah. So I just want to touch on one thing about the controversy with yoga. And then I will say that part. But so one of the things that the Lord showed me, and you spoke to it, is that yoga can be redeemed for the glory of God and the good of us, right? The good of others. And the reason it can is because it started as a physical discipline, and the Hindus adopted it as a physical discipline. And so it's just like when I was an athlete in college and I played soccer, my dad used to always say, use soccer as a platform to share your faith and grow in your walk with the Lord. It's the same thing with yoga because it's just physical. That's why the Hindus use it, the Muslims use it, the Buddhists use it, the New Age movement uses it. It's a physical discipline. So then we can redeem it for the glory of God and the good of others.
Yeah, it's
Just
so good
like,
for our bodies. Like the range of motion that the stress leave, like, yeah, why can people avoid it because of the fear that, you
yeah.
know, so anyways, I love
Yeah.
how you're speaking to it. I love it. I
Yeah.
love it.
Yeah. And once I had that, because I had to wrestle with it too, because when I experienced yoga in certain studios that brought in different philosophy that is not in line with scripture, I had a hard time. And the Spirit of the Lord said, out. And I left
Wow.
respectfully,
So good.
quietly, but we have to heed his spirit within us. And if it is calling us to step out, then we obey. But then to have this opportunity to create a redemption for it, and allow all of us to experience that worship that puts us in. And I love the way you framed it. You said, it's hard for us in this day and age with everything we have, all the distractions, to get an hour with continual spirit-led worship, the scripture being spoken over you, the physical release, the spiritual release, the mental release. It really is that like refilling of the cup so that we can be poured back out, right? And so it's such a blessing. And when I had the opportunity to even be with you guys at the conference the other day, even just for me teaching, I couldn't do anything because I'm limited with the injury, but speaking his word, being in a room full of women that are moving, that are praying, that are worshiping, that are breathing, that are, taking care of this temple that God has given us, it empowers us, right? It brings that unity within the body. And there's just a whole nother element to that aspect too. So,
Awesome.
yeah. Sorry, I forgot your second.
No, I didn't get to the second
that.
question, but I love it. No, this is perfect. And because we're gonna kind of, as they say, land the plane a little bit, but there's two things. So that we had talked about your trip to Africa.
Oh yeah.
And you're talking about how, so some people had donated money so that you can go on this trip, this long desired trip of going to Africa, and God just made a way. And so, and they asked you, so I'm going to say what I remember. They asked you, hey, can you come with this trip? Because it was a missions trip, basically, would you say, or?
Yes,
Okay.
it was.
And so I remember you telling me that you told them, okay, I would love to go. I want to go, but I'm, with all that you said you were going, that was going on in your life, you're like, I'm kind of going to be quiet, or I'm going to stay behind the scenes. Right. So you take it from there. Cause that one story, I was like, oh, I love it. Two stories out of that.
Yeah, totally. So yes, I have wanted to go to Africa since I was 17 years old. I was at Biola my first year after graduating high school, and we had a missionary come and speak in our chapel, and she talked about her experience in Africa. And I thought I was going to be a missionary. That was my plan, and that was my focus for school. I was an intercultural relations major, and I was going to teach English in Africa or somewhere in South America. But Africa was like, I really wanted to go. And so fast forward, I ended up transferring and following soccer to a different school. And but that desire always was in my heart. Well, once I got married, my parents were in their ministry full time, and they had an opportunity to develop now they lead U-Turn for Christ, which is a drug and alcohol rehab, and they have them all over the world, where they were able to, somebody was able to donate land, and they were going to start a U-Turn in Africa. So they started ministry in Africa years ago. But I was in college, then I got married right out of college. My youngest brother got to go with them. My two younger brothers both got to go with them. And I was like, what? That's not fair. Yeah. But, I was doing my own thing. And, and then when I got married, I think, that kind of like was at the back of my head. I didn't really think about it too much. You're raising young kids, like missions field doesn't seem like it's realistic, Right. And so this last year, I was in really tough situation financially again, and God always keeps like putting me in these like hills and valleys, and I was just like, okay, Lord, I don't know. We had to move the studio, and we had some challenges, and I was just praying like, God, I don't know what you want me to do, like is this still, did I mishear you, right? Is this still what you have for me, or do I need to go do something else? And he's so good in the way he confirms things. And so when he gave me the mission and vision for Arise, one of the things that I have a passion for and want to do is be able to, take Arise on mission. But for this season of life, I was just like starting to try to find answers in my own strength. And the Lord just like, on my mat again, spoke to me and said, you need to surrender. And it was 2 weeks later that someone called and said that there was somebody who was paying for my trip, and that they wanted me to join the team to go to Africa. And that's exactly, I was so excited. I was beyond myself. I was like, Lord, wait, what? How do I leave when all this stuff is undone, and I don't know what even 2 months from now is going to hold? And he just said, trust me. And I almost said no, because I was so fearful of what was going to happen with Arise, when really he showed me, if I've called you to this and if I've told you to continue, I will continue to provide for you. Yes. And that's been a constant surrender and a constant like, okay, Lord, like I'm trusting you. And so I called him and I said, I'll go, but I just want to be in the background. Like, I'm going, I just want to be on, just like serving, doing like whatever, like little odds and ends. And I had no perspective on what was, going to take place. I just literally was so excited just to be able to be a part. And when I was there, it's so cool how God opened the door. So witchcraft is really prominent in some parts of Africa. And so in some of the villages where they are building the church and starting to build the mission there, yoga again has a stigma, and they are afraid of it because of the belief that it may be calling on false gods and those things. So I had the opportunity to then share what we just talked about. But then in another village, I had the opportunity. They asked me to come. It was just one rainy day, and they asked me to come with a group of leaders that were going to pray over a woman that was having some physical pain. And so we went, and they asked me to pray, and they asked me to do some yoga with her, and some light yoga, because she's 81. She can't move super well, and some body work. So I began to use essential oils and prayer and massage. And the power of the Spirit was so it's going to bring me to tears, but it was so amazing, because here I was thinking, I'm not going to do anything with Arise or anything with the vision God has given me. This is not about that. This is about just going with another ministry and serving alongside. And here God created this space to just remind me, like, I've called you to this, and there's a reason why. And there's people who need freedom, and there's people who need to know that no matter what they're going through, physical, spiritual, emotional, they have the power to arise and to continue to shine because of me in them. And so I did this thing with her, this body work and yoga and prayer. And I went back and I was just like beside myself, like, Lord, you are so amazing. And she ended up reaching out to the local community there, the woman who leads the women there. And she said, I slept for the first time in so long. I can't believe the difference. And she asked me to come back. So I got to serve her again the second, 2 more times before I left. And then we went to another village, and I was able to go to a women's addiction home and lead them through a Christ-based yoga there. And it was just like the freedom, the joy, the healing, like in that moment for these women was so impactful. It was like another layer of that healing for me, another confirmation that, like, Arise is what I've called you to. It's a ministry, but it's also a command. Like, keep going, rise up, like, do not quit.
Yes.
And,
love it.
And I know that's your passion too, to empower women when you are at that low point, to say, no, I'm going to choose to rise up. I'm going to choose to be that lioness, that warrior, that contender for my faith, because it's not this, I'm not weak, I am strong in him. Right. Yeah. And so, yeah.
Okay. So you mentioned lioness because, like I said, the last time we talked to you, you described that lioness that you saw, which led into what I'll finish up with. But if you can share that story of what you saw.
Sure. Yeah. So this is part of the African experience that, like, it's just like so God to put all these things in place. So after we served, the very last thing we did, we actually did it in between 2 different villages. So we got to go on a safari, and I was in awe. I mean, I love nature. I love being outside. So I was on top of that Jeep, just soaking in the sun, like praising the Lord, crying, just like, I can't believe I'm here. Like arms up, like I was completely like 3 shades darker when I came home, and proud of it. Just from the safari. But it was absolutely incredible. Just an amazing time of prayer. And we were praying the whole time. My mom is a huge prayer warrior. She is passionate about prayer. And she always prays that she'll see all the animals that, they call it the big 5, and all the rare ones. So we were already praying that we would see all these rare animals, and we had seen almost everything. And we were coming to go to the other side of the park to exit out. And we came across this cliff, and it spanned for miles and miles. And so I was just up there, like gazing, just looking, praying, like asking God, like, wow, this is just, I'm in awe. And so all of a sudden I spot this lioness, and she's walking the cliff edge, and down below, it's like this big chasm, and there's a river in there. Yeah. And she's just walking, and she's like stellar and confident and focused and majestic and like fierce and fearless, and all I can think is, Lord help whatever she's after.
Bless this food.
Yes, exactly.
What you're about to say.
Yes. But in that moment, she's on the hunt, right? She's determined to find and provide for her family, her crew. And the Lord spoke to me, and he said, that's you. That's the women that I want you to speak to. I want you to remind them that they are fierce, that they are fearless, that they are majestic, that they are focused, that they are determined, that they can have that determination, and they can be that defender and that provider and that protector for their family. Now, ultimately, he's the protector, right? But we are a part, like he is within us. So that fuses out to our children. And when I saw that picture, it was so powerful. And the Lord just said, keep focused, keep being that lioness, keep rising up, keep arising and training other women that you don't have to sit in silence, that you don't have to sit in fear, that you don't have to stay in bondage, that there is freedom through Christ. There's a verse in Galatians that is our motto at Arise, and it's, for freedom, Christ has set us free. Like, that is our gift from him. And he sacrificed everything so that we can walk in that freedom. And one of my favorite things to remember is the same power that kept Christ on the cross, that gruesome, like painful, horrible death, is available to us. And that same power that allowed him to rise from the dead is available to us. Yeah. And so when we tap into that power, that lioness is just a picture of that fierceness that we can have in him. And that fierceness brings us to the freedom. And so it was life-changing. It was life-changing. Like, I'll never forget it. And he reminded me of it just the other day, like, lioness, daughter, keep going, you know? Yeah. Stay focused.
That, like, no doubt, that's so my heart. That's exactly why God brought us together. The last time that we saw each other, when you brought that up, I think I just changed the title, and it would like dawn on me like, oh my gosh, my book, that's not even my book. And we were talking about, which we totally felt like God was like calling us to, which is gonna happen.
Yes.
Starting locally.
Yep.
You know, so for me, you know, like the book thing, like, and I know that you started writing too, you were here for it.
Yes.
Like, as an author, it's like, I like to write, I don't like to market, I don't like to do those things. How do you do that? It is still that challenge. But that was the one thing that I know that he was saying, and he confirmed it as I saw you last at that women's conference, is get connected locally. So here I'm trying to do the whole, I got my friends on Marco Polo, I've got the Zooms and all that stuff, and definitely not disregarding those relationships, but to get back and to start with your community is what he is doing with both of us. And I am so excited. Like, when you talk, I can just, the way that when you were there at the restaurant, you're telling me, and you're like, dude, like the lioness, I was like, oh my gosh, I totally saw it. And it fires me up. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, like, this whole podcast thing, probably today, probably the last couple of days, you know that God is calling you to something. Like, you feel it, you know it, you sense it. And at the same time, it's coming so hard and strong from the enemy to say, no, you're not supposed to do that. No, what are you thinking? What are you talking about? Like, all these things. And I it's like this temptation to keep putting it off. No, I'm not ready. No, this is not what God is calling me to. And it's like, no, I have to just step. If God is calling me to step, I don't care how I sound. I don't care how I look. Bless it. And he's going to bring who he wants to, because someone needs my voice. Someone needs your voice. Oh my gosh, I need your voice. Like, you are so encouraging to me. So us two, I'm so excited because we're going to take Murrieta territory, territory, all these other places. I don't know the cities, but God is he's going to give us our territory for him, and he's going to raise up women. I know that I've been called that whole thing, setting the captives free. And obviously just hearing you and hearing your strength and hearing your passion, that's exactly what he's called you to also. And so I love that he is taking the broken places that, you know, that we've come from, all those things. And he's going to make beauty, and he's going to do amazing things from what the devil tried to steal. And so
absolutely.
I don't know where this falls with the order, but man, this was awesome.
It was such a blessing. And I literally just got chills because, you know, just to speak to that, the reality of the enemy coming against you, like 3 or 4 times today, you know, that voice creeps in, like, don't do it. You have so much, like, just take, you know, and then that, like, that desire in all of us, right, to have this like perfection thing, and just like silencing that, and even, you know, just instead again going back to him and saying, God, you speak, you lead us, you do what you want to do. And even when we were having computer glitches, and when I first tried to get on my Zoom, it was blocking me out. It was saying I couldn't get in for 30 minutes. I'm like, and all of a sudden, normally I'd be like, the anxiety would start building. And I was like, Lord, you're above technology. You're above all of this. Like, I know the enemy does not want this to happen, because we are coming for our women, and we are coming for, like you said, the territory. And the Lord is so much more powerful. And then he just created peace. And look at how, I mean, you know, it worked out. So
I love it. Yeah, it was, I almost want to say this needs to be the first one. Who knows? We'll see. We'll see. I'm so excited. I'm so thankful that God has connected us. And obviously it goes to show, like, we need to do this way more.
Yes.
Our market. What is that thing? What is that on Saturdays? The things that we did.
Then the
Farmers market.
Farmers market. I was like, gonna say the night market. That's my yeah.
Yes. So we do something, but thank you again so much.
Yeah.
Let's go eat.
Thank you. Yes, definitely.
Yes. Yeah.
All right.
So this is the end of this one. I am truly blessed and so thankful for you, Jules. Looking forward to what God has in store for you, your family, and for us together. So
thank you. Me too. Love you. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Until next time, love well, celebrate your strength, and discover the new things you are capable of. You are a light in the lives of those around you, and no night is too dark for you to find your way.